Hello, everyone. This is Jeffery Giesener for the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance Group, and we're talking to Ettie Zilber from it's Phoenix, right?
Yeah, Phoenix.
And we're going to be doing a series called the Keepsake Diaries, and Ettie has a number of very sentimental keepsakes that she'll be sharing with us. But before we do, I want to make sure everyone knows that Ettie is an author who wrote the Holocaust Memoir of Love and Resilience. It's a terrific book. So it's available on Amazon and other places. So Ettie, welcome to the Keepsake Diaries. And why don't you get started with the keepsakes that you want to share with us?
With pleasure. It's a lovely idea. Thanks for starting this, and I look forward to hearing about other people's keepsakes. So I have a few keepsakes that I pulled out, and if I had to categorize them, I would say some are from before the war. One is from right after the war, and then some are from the years in the DP camps in Germany. And then one is sort of very unique, and I'll tell you about that. Okay.
Great. Sure.
So it is probably clear to everybody that most survivors have nothing from their old life before the war. Everything was gone. Everything was gone, particularly photographs. And it's a very sad commentary that survivors and their descendants might not even have one photo of the family, of a parent, of a grandparent, a sister, a brother, a child. And that's really sad, but we were very, very lucky. And we do have photographs. And so I'll share some of them with you. This is, now it's a photocopy, but this is a photo of my grandmother and grandfather. And this was, they were from Lithuania, Kaunas, Kovno, Lithuania, and a young married couple. And if you look carefully, you'll see that the photo has creases. It's all creased. And there's a reason for that. The reason is my grandmother, when the Nazis came into the city and attacked the city and occupied the city, my grandmother and the family, my mother, they took a decision to try and escape to Russia. And my grandmother had the foresight to take a few photographs and give them to a trusted neighbor. And she asked her to please keep these photographs for after the war. And the neighbor did. And this was one of the photographs, but of course, she didn't want to be caught with these photographs. So she hid them inside the mattresses, and the mattresses were made of straw in those days. And so for 4 years, these photos were hidden in the mattress. So there was this photo, and there was also this photo. Now this photo, as you can see, I'm trying to center it here. Is it centered?
Oh, yep.
Almost, now it is. If you look carefully, you see that the whole thing has been touched up and painted.
Mm-hmm.
And after the war, many years later, my mother took this photo to an artist of some sort, and the artist touched up the photo because it was also very, very wrinkled. And like the other one, because this was also hidden in the mattress.
So Ettie, let me ask you if you could pay the respects. Please give us your grandmother and grandfather's name and your parents' names as well.
Wonderful, I'll do that, thank you. So my mother is right here in the photo. This is all opposite. I gotta go, it's like driving backwards.
Yeah.
Okay, this is my mother, Zlata Santotsky, and my grandmother, Etta Santotsky. I'm named after Etta. And my grandfather, Yakov Santotsky. My
Uh,
sister is named after him. And so, and the sisters, they were four girls. So my mother was Zlata, her other sister was Ida, Nechama, and Genya.
and the young one is how old in this picture?
The little one must have been about 8 years old in this picture. And the only ones to survive were my mother and her sister Nechama. The others
Can you
were
date
killed.
that? Can you date that picture? Do you know when that was taken?
I would guess that it was just before the Russians came, 1940.
Okay.
That would be my guess. Maybe 39, but I think perhaps 40. So these are the photos we have. Now, after the war, when my mother eventually got back to Kovno, she went to her house, her own house, and guess who was living in the house? The neighbor.
Mm.
The neighbor moved in, which was also quite common. But this was a good neighbor, and she took my mother in, and she fed her and took care of her, and she pulled out these photos and gave her these photos, which when my mother describes that moment, it was an extraordinary moment to be given those photos after all they went through. So needless to say, these photos were always framed and on the walls of every one of our houses. We had a lot of houses. And I grew up with these photos on the wall. And from day one, I knew this is my grandmother, this is my grandfather, and I'm named after them. And, you know, if I would ask where they are, my mom said, well, they died in the war. And that was sort of it when I was very young. Later, we learned more about what happened. So those are the pre-war artifacts, or keepsakes, as you call them. Now, I'll show you this one now because it sort of fits into pre-war, but I only acquired it after the war, actually only in 2017. This is a military medal, all right? And in Lithuania, in 1918, between 1918 and 1920, Lithuania was fighting for its independence. And they had an army, but they needed volunteers to help. And so many, many people volunteered to help in the War of Independence. And 500 Jews from Lithuania also volunteered to fight. My grandfather was one of those volunteers. And after the wars, these people they were called savanores, and that means volunteer. And they were so highly respected. Every year on Independence Day, there was a parade, a military parade with celebrations, and they were marched through the streets, and everybody was applauding. And they all received a medal like this. And my grandfather was very, very proud of his service. And he always kept the medal in his pocket. It was always in his pocket. As it turned out, in the story that's in my book, my mom tells that this medal saved his life the first time. When all the men of Kaunas, 5,000 men of Kaunas, were taken and massacred and shot up at the 7th Fort. And my grandfather was among the group. And the men were told to dig their own, the pit that they would eventually be in, they were told to undress, and they were going to be shot. And my grandfather had the wherewithal to pull the medal out of his pocket and show it to the Lithuanian, and these were Lithuanians who were shooting. He showed him the medal. He says, I want you to know you're about to kill a Savanores. And the Lithuanian pulled him out of line and didn't shoot him. He was sent to the Gestapo prison instead, which was also a stroke of luck. but he did not get killed on that day. But my mother and the family didn't know he wasn't killed. They thought he was dead.
Hmm.
And it was not till about a week or so later, when the women and children were released home, um, he appeared in the doorway of the house. And you can just imagine the happiness. And he was the one who told them the story of what happened to him and what happened to all the 5,000 others. And he knew very well what happened. And so that's the story. So when
So,
I went to, yeah,
so you said you acquired this in 2017. There
yeah,
must be an interesting story about your acquisition of this as well.
sure. So I was in the process of writing the book based on my mother's testimony, and everything she mentioned, I made a list of every single item that she mentioned. And when I did decide to go to Kovno, I wanted to see every single place that she mentioned. And the fact that she mentioned this medal. And I thought, oh, okay. I Googled and I found a photo of the medal. And I contacted an antique dealer in Kovno who specializes in coins and medals. And I sent him the photo of the medal. And I said, do you have a medal like this? And he said, I'll find one for you.
Hmm.
So when I arrived, he came and he had the medal, and I bought it from him. And so now we have the medal.
So
Now, was it my grandfather's medal? We'll never know.
it started, the acquisition and the provenance started with a picture of the medal. If I'm hearing
Well,
you.
I wanted to see what it looked like so that I could contact somebody and say, hey, can you help me find a medal like this?
I see. So you knew what the medal was called, and then you did a Google search and you actually found the picture. I got it.
I Googled Savanoris, Lithuania, medal, and this picture came up. And so I knew that this was, and it says on it, Savanorio. So I realized that's the medal, and the guy found it for me.
That's a really beautiful story. So I want to do a little segue here.
Okay.
You talked about Lithuania. I know that you've just returned from Lithuania. So maybe you can tell the audience a little bit of what you were doing around Holocaust education in Lithuania.
Well, I was invited out to an international school. My career was in international schools in multiple countries, but through my contacts, I was invited out to Lithuania to do some professional development with staff of the international school there. And in addition to the professional development, she wanted me to speak to the students as well as the adults in the community about the Holocaust, since my Holocaust story is a Lithuanian story. So I gave two presentations about my family and the Holocaust. And at the evening presentation, I was pleased to see professors of history from the Vilnius University. They attended, Jewish community members attended, journalists attended, and general public. And it was quite well received. So
How big of a Jewish community is there now in
not much, not much, you know. I don't even know if they have, maybe 100 people.
Hmm.
And not all of them are originally from Lithuania. Some of them migrated at some point later on.
And how old were the students that you were speaking to?
High school
High-
students, yeah. I do a lot of talks for schools, both in the United States and overseas.
Okay.
So
Took you out of
I was also, just before the pandemic, I was invited to speak at 6 schools in Germany.
Mm.
And that was also quite an experience. So,
So let's go ahead and present your next artifact.
okay, so another one from before the war, which I'll share. This one we received because anybody who had relatives outside of Europe before the war, typically Jews would send photographs of the family, for holidays. So the family outside of Europe had photos. So many survivors after the war asked these relatives to please send copies of the photos. So we have quite a few photos that were taken before the war, but we got them after the war from these relatives. So this was another one, which is not a studio photo, and that's why I love it. It's an outdoor photo of my grandmother and grandfather, the same ones you just saw, my great grandmother and great grandfather sitting in the chairs with the 3 daughters. So this was probably 1932. And they lived in Calvaria, in Lithuania. And so this is another one of my favorites. And this is definitely an heirloom. Now, right after the war, I think it was probably, if I look at this photo, I would say maybe 5 or 6 months after the war, after liberation. So we're talking perhaps June 1945. This is my mother and her little group of women friends who kept each other alive in the concentration camp in Stutthof and on the death march. And they literally kept each other alive every single day because it was either from starvation or from typhus. They all got typhus, and if this one was not sick, so she was taking care of the sick one. Then when the sick one recuperated, they took care of the other one who obviously got sick. So they all got typhus at one time or another. But if you look closely, there's a man in the picture.
I see, yes.
Yeah, and that's my grandfather.
No kidding.
After liberation, he found my mother.
Unbelievable.
He found everybody that was still alive.
Wow.
And this guy was amazing. And so he found
Where is your mother in this picture?
she's the second oh, for God's sake. Okay, she's the second from the right with the schmata on her head, with the black schmata on her head.
Yep.
Okay. And her good friend Henny is right in the front here.
Now, did your mother talk about the people that are in these pictures as you grew up?
Yeah. She definitely talked about it. First of all, Henny, I knew, we were always visiting each other in States. And the others, I believe, stayed in Lithuania after the war and came to Israel. Some of them came to Israel much, much later. So yeah, I met some of them. I knew some of them, and this is a relationship that there is no other relationship like the LagerSchwesters, as they were called, the camp sisters.
Yeah.
And they literally, and this was a common phenomenon in concentration camps amongst the women. Okay, what else do I have? So the next category is after the war in the DP camp. So here you have a whole bunch of survivors, and every one of them is their basic needs were taken care of in the DP camp. They had a place to live. They got cigarettes. They got some basic foodstuffs, and then they all went and got jobs. So they had some money, and so they were trying to recuperate the lost years of their lives, and they were trying to have a good time. So they would travel, and I have lots of photos from the DP years. And DP means displaced persons.
And which DP camp was it?
We were in Landsberg,
Using we, how does
which
that,
means I was born there.
okay, I wanted to get that out on the.
Yeah. So, so the photos that I saw as a child of the DP camp, why they were all socializing, dancing, skiing, playing sports, traveling, swimming in the river. I mean, it looked like summer camp. So I always thought that DP camp was like summer camp as a child. Anyway, but in their travels or in their interactions with the local population, the Germans were in bad shape. The Germans were definitely not in a good position financially, economically. So my parents said, you know, for a loaf of bread, you could stay in somebody's house for the night and get 3 meals, you know, on a vacation trip or something. So my parents, they would barter for all different things. And so this coffee grinder, I remember as long as I remember myself. This is an old German coffee grinder. And I'm assuming that my parents used it in the DP camp.
So can you tell us the name that's written on the front?
Yeah, Kandler Mole. That's all. That's all it says here. Kandler Mole. Mole is a mill. So
Is there any date on it?
no, no, I don't know. I could look it up, you know, and find some similar items. But
You don't get hit with that.
yeah. And this, you know, once my mom gave me this coffee grinder.
When was that?
I think she gave it to me probably in the 70s.
And what was the reason why she decided that it was time to give you this?
I might have asked her for it. She wasn't using it, and I said, you know, I would love to have it. She said, fine, here. And then I started a collection of antique coffee grinders. So I eventually had about 50 of them.
Wow.
And I have since sold them off because had to downsize. And likewise, they acquired a dinner service, a Rosenthal dinner service, a full service they had. And when my mom died, we divided up the dinner service amongst myself and my 2 sisters.
Are you using a service like for the holidays? Will you use any of the
I have used the serving pieces, not the plates, because, you know, it's got the gold gild. You can't put it in the dishwasher, forget it. So, but the serving pieces I have used over the years on the table. And it's very, very pretty. You know, you have to wash it by hand, of course, but hey. And so those are some of my artifacts.
Okay,
That
got to you because everyone's going to want to ask. So step a little bit to the left or to the right and tell us, even though it's not a Jewish story, tell us how you acquired this in Nicaragua painting. It's absolutely beautiful, and I want to give everyone a full view of it.
I gotta get out of the way.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Perfect. So why don't you tell us a little bit about this painting?
It has nothing to do with the Shoah.
Okay, that's all right.
As I said earlier, I lived and worked in 6 countries. And when I was living in Guatemala, I traveled a lot around Central America. And I went to Nicaragua and did a tour around Nicaragua with a friend of mine.
And when was this?
This was in 2007. Yeah, must have been 2007. And so we traveled around, and I am crazy about art, and everywhere I travel, I would buy paintings or sculptures or textiles. And I went into an art gallery in Nicaragua. They have some outstanding artists there, particularly naive artists. And I saw this painting, I fell in love with it, and I bought it. And here it is.
Give us another view and then we'll say goodbye, because it was such a pleasure seeing your keepsakes. And Ettie, it's always fun to talk with you. You're a great storyteller, and I love getting together with you. So thanks for bringing your memories, your parents' pictures, and some special keepsakes to the Keepsake Diaries. So thank you very much.
Well, you're more than welcome, and I look forward to hearing about other people's keepsakes.
Well, they are going to be online, and that message will come out sometime in October. So let me